Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutare Swayam Rupa Karamayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamaram Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Scha Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Samsadevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Larita Shri Vishakanvitam Cham Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Dev Maheshwara Guru Shaksha Parabara Tashmai Shri Gurave Namaha Durgame Patime Andasha Skarapate Garamana Shakirpaya Sarananu Santu Santu Varam Varam Mugam Kavit Pakariyan Savara Smarane Panga Yedlangana De Kataragane Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagat Pate Gopisha Gopika Kantara Kantana Mostute Jayatam Sarito Pango Mamuntir Matir Kati Matsavasha Param Bojo Radha Madan Monam Shriman Rasa Rasaram Vivam Sivada Karsan Vinashanar Gopanata Sriyasaram Divyad Vrindaranyaka Padrumada Srimad Ratnagara Shima Shanashto Shri Sri Radha Shira Govindaya Prasadavihi Seva Manushmanami Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmanitaya Cha Gadhaitaya Krishnaya Govindaya Namo Namah Mangalam Bhagavan Vishnu Mangalam Gudurajita Mangalam Padidikaksho Mangarayatano Harim Om Narayanaya Vidmehi Vasudevaya Dhimahi Tano Vishnu Prachodayate Om Mahadevi Vidmehi Vishnu Paditi Dhimahi Tano Lakshmi Prachodayate Mahalakshmi Namastubhyam Namastubhyam Sare Sare Hari Priya Namastubhyam Namastubhyam Dire Dire Tapta Kanchana Gavonagi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vishavanusute Devi Pranamani Pari Pare Subham Karoti Kairam Aragam Darasamaram Sati Buddhi Manashira Dupa Jyoti Namasharam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tiramane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesa Sunyavadi Praskada Desana Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Good morning, Wisdom Wednesday. We're diving into this verse in the 7th chapter of the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 22nd verse, for the third time in a row. It's about fearlessness. And I want to just share with you that earlier this morning I had a Zoom call with Devi Deva, with whom I'm working on the Relevance Committee. Janya, his secretary, who transcribes everything, and Devananda, a wonderful devotee in Las Vegas who has worked with the Western community, yoga community, for many, many years. Been on the Relevance Committee for a year and a half or so, trying to figure out how we can reach out more to a diverse community, get out of our kind of niche that we're in, and have more of an impact on more people's lives. And Devananda said a few things that I want to share with you. He said, more dialogue, less monologue. More dialogue, less monologue. Here I am, monologuing. But we did have Chaitanya Charan on the show. I remember going back to when we were programming originally for the radio station. I was in Los Angeles. I had a studio. Los Angeles, a lot of devotees come and go. Big community there, and a lot of traffic. So at that time, I interviewed Radhanath Swami, and we had a series of 3 interviews over several days. And he basically told the whole story that later was in his book, Journey Home. Became a New York Times bestseller. So amongst the different programs in those days was the Bhagavatam Roundtable, and I would drag in various devotees like Pushkar, Narantra, Pushpadanta, Bhutatma, and any other guests who happened to be coming through LA, and we would discuss the Srimad Bhagavatam Roundtable series of shows. So it's nothing like a monologue. For me, I love to just kind of get on the stump there and share. But good point Devananda made, more dialogue. Listen to visitors and guests more. We have so many good comments from all of you, Anjali and Britta, by Bobby, and so many other who make good comments. So I just want to send a notification out there that our ears and eyes are open to you. Another point he made was get to know people's names. I remember I became the life membership director in Los Angeles because I noticed that guests weren't being received, they weren't being acknowledged. So I stationed myself on the stairs of the temple there every Sunday night as people would arrive for the Sunday program. I would give them a good smile. And over the course of several weeks, I got to go know their names. And so when I would welcome people by mentioning their names, they would melt in appreciation. A few weeks later, the then Life Membership Director, Nava Yovana, came to me and said, Caru, I quit. You're the new Life Membership Director. I said, I'm not going to be the Life Membership Director. I got enough stuff on my plate. He said, well, whether you like it or not, you are the Life Membership Director. He said, everybody who comes asks for you. Every time I pick up the phone, they want to talk to you only. And that was because I knew their names. I was a welcoming face. They were not just faces in the crowd, but they were faces that were familiar to me, whom I recognized and to whom I could put a name. So yes, the point is more dialogue, listen to people as well as speak to them in Krishna conscious philosophy, take the trouble to learn people's names, give them a little prasadam when they come to visit. And what was the other thing? The other thing is, and this may be the most important thing, is thank people. Thank people. We just had an amazing feat. Up in Salt Lake, we have Tuesday night conference calls every week. And we've been talking about clearing this retention pond. It's got full of Chinese elms, and they've gotten almost chest high. And it needs to be cleared out. The city of Mill Creek will think of us as being in violation of our contract to provide release from floodwaters in case of excessive rain. Not that that happens very often in Utah. But yeah, we could have gotten fined if we'd had an inspection. We've been talking about it for weeks on the Tuesday night meeting, putting in notes and sending out to people. Didn't get any response from the Salt Lake community, but Joshua here from Spanish Fork happened to have seen the notes of the meeting, got his family, Pam, his wife Pam, and his daughter Shelby in the car, went up there last Saturday, worked for 4 hours, took 3 pickup truck loads of Chinese elms out, and you should see how clean and proper that retention pond is now. So I just want to mention this as a way of thanking Joshua. I know that he listens not live to these things, but he listens to them after the fact. So on behalf of the Salt Lake community, on behalf of all the devotees, thank you. We don't need to be thanked because we know as devotees that Krishna takes note of even the smallest service, but we need to thank other devotees. We need to show our appreciation. We can't live in a community where that is thankless, where your service is taken for granted. I heard a story. I was researching for Sunday's talk. I don't think I'll use this story for this upcoming talk, but it's a good story. There was a monastery, a Catholic monastery somewhere in Europe. It was in ruins. It had one time been very nicely maintained, clean. There were a lot of different monks in there, and it was in a beautiful forest area where the local people would come for picnics. There was a lot of interaction, community involvement in the monastery. But over time, the monastery failed to attract new younger people. The residents, maybe 6 or 8, got older and older and were less able to maintain the monastery. They were less able to fundraise. And so things gradually succumbed to disrepair. They racked their brains. They were worried and concerned about how to revive the monastery, bring it back to its former glory, at least maintain it. They racked their brains. They had discussions, meetings. They couldn't figure out what to do. In the meantime, there had been a Jewish rabbi who came into their neck of the woods occasionally, had his own little hut, and would do some meditation, chanting. Finally, they said, we can't figure out what to do to reverse this downward trend. Let's go ask the rabbi. So they sent 1 or 2 representatives, and they went to the rabbi, and he said, what's the problem? They explained the whole thing. He says, is anything come to mind? Do you have any advice? He said, no. He said, I can't think of anything to tell you how to reverse the trend and bring back this former glory. And then as they were leaving, the rabbi just kind of threw it out. He said, one amongst you will save the monastery. One amongst you will be the Messiah. So as they walked away, they were thinking, which one? 6 or 8 old guys? Is there anyone that's due for an inheritance? Is there anyone? And they started wondering which one of the 6 or 8 ones of the elderly monks would save the monastery. And they start to see each other as potential saviors. Well, could it be this one or could it be that one? The result of that was they started to treat each other with more respect. They started to say please. They started to say thank you. They started to listen to each other more. They started to sit down more often and share their meals. There became a whole new mood of loving care and respect amongst the elderly monks. This came to the attention of people who would come for picnicking and hiking in the area. Gradually, more and more give and take, more and more reciprocity arose between the monastery and the local people. Even to the point that some of the younger people started coming to the monks, being attracted by their mood of mutual respect and politeness. And eventually the younger people started joining. They had young bodies to do repairs and improvements. And the whole monastery regained its former glory simply because the monks started to see each other with new eyes, started to appreciate each other, started to show more respects to each other. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that the most important, as far as interpersonal relationships, verse of his 8 instructive verses in the Shiksha Stakams, Trinada Pisa Nichana Turora Pisa, Amanina Maradana Kirtanya Saradi, says one should be ready to offer all respects of others, to others be devoid of all sense of false prestige, feel oneself lower than the straw in the street. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. In such a state of mind, one can listen to others, do others the courtesy of listening to them and not interrupting them in the middle of their sentences or assuming that you know what they're going to say. Sharing prasadam, revealing your mind, saying thank you, having more dialogues than monologues. These simple items of courtesy and respect can in themselves be potentially revolutionary. If some of our temples have sunk into a kind of a little place where they're stuck, not moving forward, not attracting new people, not extending the mission like Prabhupada wanted, you might want to just take another look at your God brothers and your God sisters, consider how much they've given up in order to serve the mission, and start showing more respect to them. None of that has anything to do with the verse, but it's fresh in my mind. We had a wonderful conversation with Devananda, who's an amazing devotee down there in Las Vegas, and we look forward to working with him more on the Relevancy Committee. If you want to know more about the Relevancy Committee, let me know, and I'll give you some links where you can access the materials that we've generated while we've been meeting throughout the course of 1 year. Anutama is on the committee. Devi Deva is on the committee. Name is Sharanya Das. I'm missing some key person here. I can't even think of everybody's name. Nitya Kusori, Shivani, I think from Philadelphia. Very, very powerful group of people. We're trying to expand the numbers so as to have more of an influence in the society in general. All right, let's go. Part 3. Krishna Krishna Mahabaho Bhaktanam Yankanam Trameko Dayamananam Apavargo, Shri Samsara. Apavargo means relaxed, free of stress, free of anxiety, and most especially free of fear. Arjuna says, "Oh, my dear Lord Krishna, you are the mighty armed Mahabaho, personality of Godhead. There's no limit to your different energies. God is all-powerful by virtue of the fact that in his supersoul feature, he's entered into each and every atom. There isn't any part of the universe where he is not present. This is called, technically speaking, a plenum. God is a plenum. God is full. He's full in his separate feature, as the transcendental autocrat of the spiritual world, but he's no less full being situated within the atom of this material world. That means from any place or part of the universe you could access his full power, but you have to have faith. You have to invoke him. Electricity is everywhere, but you have to know the technology of creating electric outlet in order to take advantage of it. So our process of tapping into the greatest power in all of material and spiritual creation is chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Tajmad Bharata Sarvatma, Sukadeva Goswami says, Tajmad Bharata Sarvat Bhagavan Ishvaro Hare. All times, all places, all circumstances. There is no unsuitable time for chanting the holy name. There's no unfit person who's not qualified for chanting. Tajmad Bharata, everybody, always, Bhagavan Ishwaropari will benefit from chanting the holy names of Bhagavan, the possessor of six sound. Tajmad Bharata Sar Bhagavan Ishwaropari, Lokasya Janatam. Any time, any place, any circumstance is good, the result of which is that you'll become free from fear. Etad nirvidyaman ichanam akuto bayam harinamanu sankritam. It's the tried and sure way to become free from fear, is to enter into the spiritual world by associating with the Lord through the chanting of his holy names. The spiritual world is not just a geographic place. It's not just a place which is far away from this material world. The spiritual world consists of three elements, essentially. Bhagavan, Bhakta, and Bhakti. Bhagavan is the Supreme Lord, the Creator, from whom Ahamsha, both material and spiritual world, comes. Bhakta, that's you and me. We're qualitatively one with the Lord. Eternity, bliss, and knowledge is our constitutional position, but we're tiny, particulates. We're infinitesimal compared to the Lord's infinity, if that's a word. So we're emanating from him. We're parts and parcels from him. We're non-different from him. And so there isn't any part of the creation which is not permeated and stamped with the personality of Godhead. He can appear in his fullness even within the atom. And the spiritual world is defined as that place where the Lord is present, and he is present within the atom. He is present within their hearts, even in this material world. We're obviously present, but what's missing, what distinguishes the spiritual world of fearlessness from the material world, which is shot through of fear, is bhakti, the principle, the activity of bhakti. God is Lord, we're servants. Constitutionally, he's Lord. Constitutionally, we're servants. So we need to serve. We need to serve. We need to set aside the domineering mentality, the drive to be the lords of all that we survey, to have our name on everyone's lips, to be the enjoyer, the proprietor. We need to set that aside. We need to retire. We need to submit our resignation from trying to compete with God, be on this level with God, throw off the domineering mentality, and act foundationally. Foundationally. We are foundationally, essentially, innately, eternally servants. So why don't we act like it? And when we act like servants, trusting in the Lord, turning our life's issues over to the Lord as our life manager, that is the spiritual world. So although this material world, generally speaking, is a world symptomized by fear, abject, all-prevalent fear, one can oneself attain immunity from that fear by taking full shelter of the Lord. One can invoke the spiritual atmosphere of fearlessness even down here in this otherwise dark, dangerous material world. But one has to do it with the faith that the Lord is all-powerful, the Lord is mighty armed, and if we take total shelter of him, he is more than capable of offering us protection. It is said in this verse, Tameko Dayamananam, you are capable of instilling fearlessness in the hearts of your devotees, apavargo Sri Samsita. Everyone who is burning in the flames of samsara, this material atmosphere, can find shelter and relief and the path of liberation in you. There's a verse in the fourth canto, I am Tratkatam Nishtu Pirusham Mano Varana Klesha Devagni. It says that just as an elephant gets relief from the forest fire is raging everywhere, and it's burning, it's pinching the hide of the elephant. It strikes terror into the heart of the elephant and its cow elephant, its baby elephants. They're freaking out in terror at the forest fire, trying to avoid it, running through the jungle, and then they find a lake and they enter into the lake and get in the middle of the lake, and immediately they switch from terror to safety, shelter, happiness. So in the same way that the elephant gets shelter and relief from the forest fire by entering into a nice cool lake in the middle of which the forest fire cannot touch it, similarly, one can get relief from the flames of material miseries by taking shelter in the lake of Krishna's holy names. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Otherwise, without taking shelter of Krishna, Prabhupada refers to the unsurrendered souls, the souls who are adrift, who have got no anchor, no faith in the Supreme, whose only purpose in life is to stimulate the senses, to exploit the objects of the senses in this material world. He said there's very little difference between such souls and monkeys. And monkeys are known for being addicted to sex life, first and foremost. Yan Maitunari, Griyamedi, Sukami Chacham, the number one snare for the soul of this material world is sex life. The momentary, flickering pleasure of sex life is so intense that it keeps all living beings trapped in this material world. Monkey-like, they stay put up with the miserable conditions of this material world in order to get the occasional sex. And in order to get sex, never comes free. It always comes with a price. So as soon as one wants to indulge oneself regularly, one wants to have that facility right close at hand, he requires privacy. He requires an apartment, and then he requires a house, and he requires food in the house. He requires a circle of friends. He requires wealth. He requires children. He requires land. There are so many requirements. As soon as one goes to satisfy the sexual urge, it comes with all of this baggage, And oftentimes, in order to provide what he wants as a stable family life, he has to accumulate more things than are what are set aside as his quota. If he just has the same things that his neighbors have, if everything were equally parceled out so that everyone had their quota and no more, then how are you going to keep the family together? Material families without Krishna consciousness, are motivated by the desire to accumulate, to keep up with the Joneses, to keep abreast of what others are having. And in order to live an inflated lifestyle where one exceeds one's quota, one can only exceed one's own quota by depriving others somewhere else on earth with less than they need for the bare survival of their lives. It says, Om Purnam Isavashimadam Sarvam Yatkin Jagana Tena Tiktena Rijana Ma Kashtaha Saradi Dhanam. The Lord has created everything in such a way that every living being, including the reptiles, the mammals, the birds in the air, as well as the human beings, they all have their quota. And if they have a sense of God consciousness, that God owns everything, that God's the Father, and that God has provided equally and fairly to all his children. And if they're satisfied with that quota, then everybody can live peacefully. That's the peace formula. But if one wants to impress more and more and more members of the opposite sex, if one wants to present oneself as very attractive, very charismatic, one wants to have others key on one, wants others to be saying one's name, one wants one's name to be in the newspapers, all of which are the manifestations of subtle sex desire, then he has to take more than what's set aside as his quota. And that results in him often cheating other people. This cheating mentality, this greedy mentality, which leads to cheating, then obviously creates enmity, and former friends become enemies. Fathers and sons and fathers go off of speaking terms. They become bitter enemies, and it's all because of unrestricted sense desire. So no wonder Prabhupada eventually, in all of his voluminous, vast writings, comes to compare the conditioned souls to monkeys. Monkeys are not only addicted to sex life, every monkey has at least 12 mates, but they jump from one tree to another. So as the monkey jumps from one tree to another, being stuck in this consciousness of enjoying sense gratification, the monkey-like soul jumps from one body to another, from one lifetime to another. Unless one purifies oneself from this sense-enjoying consciousness, that consciousness will lead one to take birth again in this material world, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Now the monkey also, another parallel is, eventually the monkey is captured by the hunter. You all know that one way of capturing the monkey is to hollow out a coconut, put a sweet in there, put a little hole big enough for the monkey to insert his hand this way, but once he grabs the sweet and holds on to it, then the hole's not big enough for him to extract his hand. And then the coconut's attached by a chain or a rope to some fixed place. And the hunter comes by hours later, captures the monkey because he's unable to let go of the sweet inside of the hollowed out coconut. So being unable to wean himself of the lusty desires for enjoying his senses, the living being is captured, and he becomes attached to different bodies and thus encaged in family life. Just like the monkey, after he's captured, he's encaged. His freedom is curtailed. So it is due to this attachment that one becomes limited to the cycle of birth, death, disease, and old in this material world. Mistakenly, the living being attached to sense gratification thinks he needs more and more and more and more and more. You often hear people say, well, if I didn't work, I have to work to put food on the table. I have to work to put a roof over my head. If that's really all you want, you just want food on the table, you want a roof over your head, you don't have to work apavarga. You don't have to work as hard as you're working. You don't have to make this huge arrangement with motor cars and combustion engines and airplanes and gas stations and military and foreign countries and freeways. You don't have to do all that in order to have food and a roof over your head. You get a little land, you build yourself some sort of a domicile, and very easily, relatively easy, the basic necessities of life are taken care of. It's the excesses that create the complication, that create the huge infrastructure for which we have to maintain ourselves right now. All this greed and extra inflated infrastructure all has poised us on the edge of a precipice over which we could go at any time, taking everything with us, and all at the push of a computer button. Because of our excessive greed, we've come into conflict with each other. We judge everybody we meet. This is a friend because they're going to help promote my sense gratification. This is an enemy because they're going to inhibit my sense gratification, or they're envious of what I have. And this, I haven't decided which side of the fence this other person falls on. So for now, they're just a neutral party. The fact is that whatever is produced by the materialist with great pain and labor for so-called happiness, the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the time factor destroys, and the ultimate end destination of the living being is to sit down and cry. And everyone who strives for excessive sense gratification in this way sees on one level the Supreme Personality of Godhead not as one's friend, not as one's provider, but so distorted his vision comes that he sees God as his enemy. God is that one who's going to take everything away. Bhagavan pumam chokshati yatkrite. He is going to do that in his function as the time factor. Karoshmin loka sayakri pravata. Krishna says, time I am, I have come to destroy all things. So it is God who's going to upset the apple cart of the materialist's nice hearth and home. And the materialist cannot help but be envious and angry and resentful of God. They're engaged in producing so many things in the name of economic development. They think that by advancing and satisfying the material needs of themselves, they're going to be happy, forgetting altogether the most basic fact of this material world, which is that everything you produce with much anger and misery and suffering and labor is going to be destroyed in due course of time. There is one who is more powerful than you. He loves you too much to leave you mucking around in this material world. Oh, it is his kindness that eventually will come and take everything away. He wants you to depend upon him, not on the stock market, not on the economy, not on your own talents, not on your own abilities. So in all of that, and it's not that we shouldn't have a wife, not that we shouldn't have a husband, it's not that we shouldn't have children, it's not that we shouldn't maintain them properly, but excessively, to an inordinate, obscene degree, that's the problem. When we do the Festival of Colors, and we used to go on the road, to save money on motels, we got a motorhome. I forget the brand name, Thor. I wouldn't recommend buying a Thor. Everything about it is cheap. But we have this Thor, and our crew would go to Vegas and did 3 color festivals in Los Angeles area. Go up to Ogden, spend the night. We did some as far away as Idaho Falls, Twin Falls, Sacramento, Reno, even as far as Santa Cruz. And so to save money, we would stay at motorhome parks. It's $35, $40 a night. In those motorhome parks, there were huge RVs costing as much as $500,000 with laundry rooms, with elaborate showers, with satellite dishes on the top, and inevitably occupied by a couple, an elderly couple, who had worked hard their whole life long, accumulated money, and then they're enjoying their money in this way by almost obscenely traveling throughout the country, consuming vast amounts of expensive gas and resources, indulging themselves at the end of their life. Usually they take their motorhomes and they travel here and there in the country to visit their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And there's nothing wrong with, like I said, having a family, traveling, visiting your family, but there's a point at which you get so involved in that, and you throw all your energy that it becomes almost obscene. And we can imagine that when the time of death comes, they are very little inclined to leave their bodies, leave their toys, leave their families, and go to somewhere they know not where. This was the dilemma, the conundrum of Paranjana. Asha means temporary. So Paranjana, eternal spirit soul, threw all his eggs in the temporary basket of material sense gratification. He was insanely attached to his wife, to his children, his grandchildren. But when he got old, they didn't care for him. Once he no longer was able to maintain them, they put him on a shelf somewhere and pretty much forgot about him. And when the time of death came, he still, in spite of the indifference of his family members, he still was so attached that he was very little inclined to leave them. Yuktashu evam pramatasha, being maddened by attachment, kutumba itachedasha, entangled in family affairs, asasada savaika, even though the soul is eternal and all of the bodies with which we are affiliated are temporary, still one loses sight of this basic dichotomy and leaves one's body in an extremely disturbed, traumatized state of mind. One can just imagine what one's situation will be in the next life. Because when you think about it, baboons have families, ants have families, duck-billed platypuses have families, mice have families, gophers have families, pigeons have families. So family life is common below the human form of life. Family life is common. So to be fixated in family life does not guarantee that you're going to even come back in a human family life. It is said here in the 7th canto of Bhagavatam by one of our favorite personalities, Prahlad Maharaj, says, Yad arta iya karmani vibha mani sasakrinara karotu upayo parisham amogam bindate phalam. Says a materialistic person thinking themselves very advanced and intelligent in technology continually acts for economic development. We always have to improve. Well, improve is a euphemism for get further entangled. Go down the wrong road. We talk about progress. Now, there is the progress also of a body which is dead, and it also progressively decays. So we need to ask the question, for what reason are we striving for economic development? Is it just decoration of a dead body? Is that what we're doing? Because without the soul, it doesn't matter how nicely you dress or groom or manicure the body. It's a dead body, and it will deteriorate. It will progress towards deterioration. It will progress negatively, if you will. So we talk about progress, economic advancement. But without paying attention to the soul, the living force, what kind of progress is it? It is progress towards destruction, progressing towards decomposition, as you might say. So no wonder that we're trying to maintain something which cannot be maintained. We're trying to build up a whole culture, a whole society, a whole infrastructure which has against it the laws of gravity, the law of inertia, the law of karma. Just like when you want to stretch a rubber band. So you only want to stretch the rubber band more and more and more and more. That's all you know. You're gonna just stretch that rubber band more and more and more and more. But at some point, the rubber band is not only not going to stretch more, but it's either going to break or it's gonna rebound back on you and injures. It's gonna snap your fingers. So no wonder people are frustrated in the pursuit of material sense gratification. One thinks that when one gets to a certain point of economic development, economic advancement, just like the monkey thinks that when he gets to his 13th wife or his 14th wife or his 15th wife, or when he gets to that tree or this tree, he'll be happy. No wonder they're unhappy. No wonder they're frustrated. No wonder they're full of fear. All that's happened in the expansion of wife, home, children, grandchildren, transportation, land, businesses, all that's happened is that one has created more and more things to be afraid of. Anything that you accumulate with great labor and effort and perhaps even cheating, depriving your fellow men of the necessities of life, you cannot maintain it. You cannot protect it. And so one lives, the more one has, the more one accumulates. All one is really accumulating is enhanced fear that eventually that will be taken away. The wise Prahlad Maharaj breaks it down here, again in the 7th canto. Rajatas churato satro shrajarat pashu pakshmi artabi karatashvasham nitya pranatavadbayam. So those who are considered very opulent and affluent, materially power and rich, are simply full of anxieties because they have to worry about Rajatas churato shvatra. They have to worry about the taxes, how much strife, how much contention there is between the political parties about how much taxes people would pay. The less powerful people, middle class and lower class people, they have to pay a great deal of money, hard-earned money in taxes. The more powerful people pay less taxes than the less powerful people. That's because they live in constant fear of their wealth being reduced by the government. So they what they would have paid in taxes, they pay for lobbies and for electing candidates that will keep them from having to pay taxes. But one way or another, in the front door, around the back door, they're going to have to put out to avoid the government appropriating their riches. And so they're full of anxiety. They have a full-time staff of accountants and lawyers to keep them from paying taxes. Then there are thieves in rows. There are people, even in their own companies, who will embezzle, who will cheat them, and they have to be always on their guard against even their own employees, what to speak of outside people, hackers, terrorists, criminals themselves, enemies. In the course of getting an inflated, opulent lifestyle, one has inevitably made enemies, and those enemies are thinking day and night how to get back at you, how to cut you down to size. Family members, many of your family members, they may make a show of affection, but on one level, they're aware that when you die, they're going to inherit all of your money. This mentality has manifested itself more than once in terms of the children arranging to do away with the family members so that they could all the more quickly enjoy their results. One has to be afraid of animals. In India, there are crows and monkeys who will steal your jewelry. They'll come right in through the bedroom window and make off with your clothes and your jewelry. You buy something as an expensive present for your wife in the bazaar, well, you better be careful because the monkeys will grab it out of you and hold it hostage in order for some bananas. Birds, like crows and all. People seeking charity, people with their hands out, asking you to help them out. And then the inevitable time factor. Time is ticking away. There's an expiration date on your wealth, on your opulence. Not only is there an expiration date, but there's a day of accounting that after you leave this present body, you will have to justify all of the criminal activities which you performed in order to maintain your family members. And then, aside from being afraid of the government, afraid of thieves, afraid of enemies, afraid of family members, afraid of animals and birds, a person seeking charity, afraid of the inevitable time factor, one is afraid of oneself. One is afraid of oneself. Should I change the password on my bank account? Are the locks on my door sufficient? Do I have the right PIN code? One appropriately considers that everybody would like to take advantage of his wealth, that everybody should have had the opportunity. If he weren't constantly vigilant on a number of different fronts, it wouldn't be long before he was divested of his wealth. So it means that you can't even trust your own self. It means that the richer you are, the more afraid you are of your own self. You fear that you may have locked your money up in an unsafe manner. You may have buried it in a place that one may have discovered it, or you may have deposited in a bank to which a hacker might have access. There might have been a breach in their database. You might have committed some mistake by which your money is at risk. So, where is peace? Where is fulfillment? Where is happiness? Again, Prahlad Maharaj comes up with the golden answer. And I'll finish with this. Sukha dukkha moksha sankalpaya sarapnodhyaya anihayasam. In this material world, every materialist desires to achieve happiness and diminishes distress and fear, and he acts accordingly. Actually, however, this is our conclusion. Think about this. Prahlad Maharaj says, one is happy as long as one does not endeavor for happiness. Can I repeat that? Prahlad Maharaj, whose consciousness was so fixed, Mahamanita Magna Shita Nedvojire Para Daraita Baita Tadviri Gainam Mahamanita Shina Soche Tato Vimukti Cheda Maya Shukaya Baramba Mudham. Prahlad Maharaj was asked by the Lord Sringadev for any benediction. Land, planets, immortality, wives, gold, horses. The Sringadev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, wanted to do something for his devotee Prahlad, who had staunchly chanted his holy name throughout all the tortures of his father. And Prahlad Maharaj refused to take anything from the Lord because he said, Soche Tatovi Mukta Maya Sukha. He said, Mahamrita Magnachita, Lord, I couldn't ask for any other blessing other than the fact that when I chant your holy names, I merge in an ocean of ecstasy. He said, if you want me to ask you for something, I'm not going to ask you for anything on my behalf, but I want to ask you on behalf of all the suffering, living entities, Maya Sukhaya, who have built this huge arrangement for false happiness. They've worked hard, cheated each other, foamed at the mouth, been full of fear and anxiety in order to build this big, huge, elaborate arrangement of Maya Sukhaya, a false arrangement for happiness. I'm simply filled with compassion for them. If there's anything that you could do to bring them to a true vision of things, to bring them to the transcendental level of Krishna consciousness, that would be my own prayer. Otherwise, happiness lasts. Happiness is achieved by not trying for happiness. That means trusting in the Lord, accepting as the Lord's mercy whatever comes your way in the normal course of affairs, contenting yourself with simple shelter, simple food. Yes, have a wife, have a family, but keep it simple. Keep it basic. Keep it God-centered. The conclusion is that one should not be ambitious to dissipate the unhappy conditions of life by working hard for material arrangements. Instead of dissipating the unhappy conditions of life, that is in fact the cause of your unhappy condition of life. Why? Because of the actions of our previous life. The happiness and distress of this life is already set up. It's already predetermined. There's nothing we can do to increase the happiness or to decrease the misery because it's already been determined by the actions of our previous life. What you're doing is by your present sinful, selfish activities, you're creating negative reactions for your future lives. So one is much better off, rather than try to increase happiness and decrease distress, one should work for self-realization, not economic development, which is impossible to prove. Nobody prays for distress in their life, and yet it comes despite their not wanting. We do everything we can to avoid distress, and yet distress comes without our wanting it. As distress comes without our wanting it, similarly, happiness will come without our wanting it. We should try neither to avoid distress nor to increase happiness, but we should try for self-realization. That is the purpose of life. That is what will free one from frustration, free one from fear, and situate one in the middle of what the purpose for having been created in this human form of life is. It is better to utilize this life for developing Krishna consciousness without any ambitions for so-called happiness. Om Tat Sat. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Well, that concludes our 3 days spent this week on this verse, and I have a strong premonition that we'll do more on that verse next week as well. Not much in terms of having dialogue as opposed to monologue, I'll admit that, but let's see what everybody's comments are. Jay, good morning. Thanks for jumping in. Janatardi, good morning. Haribo. Anjali, Britta, good morning. Natasha, good morning. Anjali joins me in thanking Joshua and his family for doing that service up there in Salt Lake City. When I was telling a story about the monastery, Britta says that happened to the Huntsville Monastery also. There was a Trappist monastery up in Huntsville. And I'm not sure when you say that happened, I'm not sure. I think they closed down. They did experience the revival that we were talking about. But if they did, let us be sure and share that, Britta. I'd like to hear that story if it's inspirational. Yes, listen to each other, loving, caring mood, reciprocity. Govinda Dev, thank you. Britta thinks it was a great story about the monastery. Sundari Priya, thanks for joining us. Bhai Bobby says, yes, respect and appreciation of every person's services. Yes. Bhai Bobby needs to work on that. I need to work on that. We all have room for improvement. And that in itself can make us attractive. That in itself can solve problems of growth and maintenance, etc. God is Lord, we are servants. We are foundationally, essentially, innately servants. Britta says, I dislike when people throw that stupid quote at me that we are created to have dominion over the world as an excuse to be selfish hoarder of God's gift. Yes, dominion doesn't mean terrorization. It doesn't mean exploitation. The Nazis had dominion over the Jews in the concentration camps. That's not what dominion means. Dominion means stewardship. If man has dominion over the birds of the air and the beasts of the lands, it means he has a responsibility to take care of them as if they were our younger brothers and sisters. Yes. Britta says, I can't, keeping up with the Joneses, she says, I can't stand the Joneses. Guru Trad Singh joins us from India. Let's see. The Joneses are my neighbors. Anjali has some neighbors called Joneses. All right. Britta says, I know a lot of folks with their hands stuck in the coconut. Obscene displays of wealth. All our diseases in this country are diseases of excesses. Yes, that would easily be the topic of another 45-minute monologue. Sukshma is in Maine. She's catching this live from Maine. She drives RVs for a living. She drives by RVs from manufacturers to the sales show floor rooms, and she also drives so she knows very well what I'm talking about. Oversized RVs, and she agrees with me that they're obscene, an American embarrassment, and that's right from someone whose job it is to drive them. So Britta says, my grandmother's about to leave this world, and all she can think about is who's going to get all her stuff. Nobody even wants it. I'm like, Grandma, just give it to the charity or church. Nobody cares about all this stuff you're collecting. Progress without God is just destruction. The more powerful people pay less taxes, and less powerful people, but through the front door or the back door. I'm glad I'm provoking all these comments. There's a plethora, I like to use new words, of comments here. My dad, Britta says, you can't even take your underwear with you when you die. Don't get your priorities all messed up. Anjali says, I'm not going to ask for anything on my behalf, but for others' false arrangement of happiness. Happiness is achieved not by trying for happiness. Those are quotes from Prahlad Maharaj. All right, lively comments today. I'm so happy that this monologue has occasioned some dialogue in the comment section. Hopefully we've got things to think about today when we're not chanting attentively Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.